Welcome everybody to this session of the Explorers. Today we change a little bit our format. I hope you're gonna like it. And today we have the privilege of having with us two of the three interns that work with the Explorers this semester. They are Tamsin Martin and Imogen Lees. I'm hoping that I'm saying your names correctly. And I have decided that it's better for you to introduce yourselves. I just want to thank you for being part of the Explorers this semester. It's always a privilege to work with students. You have enriched the program like really a lot, and I hope this video also will let you know how much you have learned about public history about the semester. So the floor is yours. Why don't we start with Tamsin?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been, a really insightful one, and I think I speak for both of us when I say we've really enjoyed it here. So just a bit to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Tamsin. I'm studying modern history at Macquarie University at the moment. So I'm in my last year of a Bachelor of Arts majoring in modern history. And once I've graduated from this, I plan on going into further research and hopefully working in the museum sector later on.
Okay, that's great. Imogen?
I will echo what Tamsin said. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for having us and interviewing us. So I'm Imogen. I am also studying modern history at Macquarie University. I'm in my last year of my Bachelor of Arts degree. My major was modern history, and I've also done a minor in medieval and early modern studies, which is a particular area of interest of mine. So that's been great. And I'm currently working full-time as a legal secretary while I finish off my degree. But I would like to eventually move into the history field, but we'll see what happens once I graduate.
Okay, thank you very much, girls. I am sure you are going to have a successful career in history. And congratulations for being on your last semesters. And I hope somehow this internship will inspire you, if not to follow the public history path, I mean to continue doing history research. So let's start with one question I wanted to know about this internship. Why did you choose this internship in particular? Why did you choose public history? And which idea did you had before, during, and after? Did it change somehow, the idea you had at the beginning and after? So, Tamsin, if you want to start again.
Yeah, of course. So I chose this internship specifically, like looking at public history, because I didn't really have the vocabulary for it before this semester, but I'd sort of realized that every way that I'd connected with history in the past was public history, like before getting to uni. I grew up going to museums every single school holidays. I read so many books that were based in time travel and history, things like that. So it was something that really always stuck out to me. And back when I was doing history extension in high school, there was this term that came up, the democratization of history. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I've always been thinking about that. And I didn't realize up until this semester that in really liking that idea, that was liking the idea of public history. And that's something that's sort of come up throughout studying public history and doing this internship. Whereas this idea that I've always had in the back of my brain for 4 or 5 years now, that's something that I've been interested in my entire life, and I'm having the opportunity to study it now. But in terms of actual public history itself, before starting this internship, I was aware of some of the things, like museums, podcasts, so documentaries, historical media, that sort of thing. But since doing the internship, I think I'm a little bit less tied to a single definition of public history. I think it's harder to define than I thought it was, because in broad strokes, it's history outside of the academic sector. It's history that the general public can see. I think that's kind of hard to define, and I think it's an ever-changing field. With the rise of social media and digital archives, things like that, public history in 2023 looks nothing like public history back in 2003. So I think it's such a flexible field that it's kind of hard to define beyond just saying it's another output of history outside of the academic sphere. I think that's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, that's actually one of the beauties of public history that you're saying, but we're going to discuss that after Imogen gives us her opinion.
My answer is fairly similar. I've been aware of the term public history for maybe a year and a half now, and I didn't know before then that there was a term for this, this way of doing history that is accessible to the public and that's outside of just a university. And when I came across the term for the first time, I realized that actually I had been I suppose reaping the benefits of public history for essentially my whole life, and through visiting museums, like Tamsin said, particularly for me, listening to history podcasts. That's a huge interest of mine. It's something that I love doing when I'm doing chores around the house. When I'm on the train, I chuck on a history podcast, and it's a really nice way to learn a little bit about a topic without needing to have actually learned about it in an academic setting. So I was really drawn to doing an internship that is based around public history, because I think it's such an important practice, and I feel really passionate about history being accessible to people who don't study it. I think it's a shame when people assume that history is just for people who study it in university, that it's for so many more people than that. And so I thought, hey, this is a great opportunity to actually get involved with an organization that does public history. So that was why I was drawn to it. And I think over the course of the internship, I mean, I had a pretty good idea of what public history was before I started. But I would say now, to me, I think it seems a lot broader. Like Tamsin said, there's so much more to it, and I now know that there's so many more ways that public history can be done. And I've also learnt that there's quite a lot of crossover with public history and other disciplines, like memory studies, historical consciousness, anthropology. So that's been something interesting that I've learned over the course of this semester.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you two have nailed some very important points about public history. Actually, yes, the practice of public history has been done for many, many decades in many parts of the world without the name, without knowing people are doing public history. They have been doing public history, like all the work in museums, libraries, etc., etc. Nowadays, it's very important about the different outlets that it has, like, for example, with digital humanities and all the podcasts and all the things that Imogen was mentioning. And that's also broadening the scope of public history, which I think is really, really important. It also changes in different parts of the world. I just came back from Latin America, and there's a very big emphasis on about public history and democracy, and making it a political commitment, which I think is very interesting. In other parts of the world, it might be a little different, but I think it's a very interesting and friendly way to take history to the people who don't need to be historians but are interested in history. That's important. And then also Imogen mentioned all the interdisciplinary part. I think that's really, really important, because some authors are actually discussing about public history, not history, but a broader term that includes many other disciplines. So actually the Explorers has done events with archaeologists, sociologists, historians. We're striving for artists, because public history is like a practice more than a definition. So I really like that answer. Thank you very much. So which activities did you undertake during this internship? Is this work relevant for public audiences? and explain to me why. And it's also, was it useful for you? Tamsin.
Yeah, all right. So I've done a fair few things during this internship. The first thing I did was 6 social media posts, 3 of which looked at female activists and scholars, 3 of which looked at a quick feature of some interesting museums in Australia. And then I made 12 videos, which are going to be going up on social media hopefully soon, showing off some different museums throughout Sydney, like taking a shot of the outside and then talking a little bit about the history and what's currently showing. And then in addition to all of that, I ended up writing 4 blog posts to go on the IFPH Explorers Bridging blog. One of which looked as a retrospective on a previous event called Public History Made by Women, which I sort of looked at within the framework of Women's History Month this year, 2023, where the theme was celebrating the women who tell our stories. Then there was one where I looked at the importance of community museums through looking at the previous event, a conversation with the curators of the Arab American National Museum. Then there was one that tied into the 12 videos showing museums around Sydney, where I sort of expanded on that in a written format to talk more about these museums and different features of them and the stories behind them. And then the most recent one that I did was another blog post which looked at the importance of digital archives. So looking at the previous event, the use and reuse of digital newspaper archives, the News Eye Project in Practice, I believe it's called. So I looked at that and then also tied it in with my experience of using Trove, the sort of like National Library of Australia's digital archive, and sort of the whole discussion surrounding that earlier this year about trying to save the funding of it because it's just such an essential service. Like I absolutely could not get through my entire degree without Trove. Like I couldn't have passed high school without Trove, realistically looking at where I used it in assignments. Like it's such an essential service. And then I also did a little bit of work looking at some of the trends of previous topics and locations that previous events looked at and sort of gave some suggestions on what to do in the future. But the way sort of all of this is really like relevant to the public, I think it's probably a bit easier for me to say this than Imogen looking at what we've each done. It's because first and foremost, like my contributions are going to be published, like, you know, to social media or to the blog. They're there for people to see. So like they're immediately facing an audience. But I think the way that they're most relevant is like, you know, I can't expect that everyone's going to have the same backstory of getting into history as me, where like you grew up going to museums, like your whole family's into it, you always read stuff to do with that, and you got really into it in an academic setting, like at school or at university. You know, not everyone's going to have that background. But if someone sees a post or like a social media post or a blog post that I've made, and that inspires them to, you know, do a bit more research or go to see that museum, or just makes them think a little bit, like that's amazing. And that's like one of the most like rewarding and interesting things about this idea of public history is like it can get anyone involved and interested. So yeah, I think that's how it's like most relevant to someone in, you know, a public audience, because it is public facing and it will hopefully be that gateway into people getting more involved.
Thank you, Tamsin. Imogen?
So the work that I've been doing for this internship has been quite different. Most of my work has been focused on compiling a comprehensive database of public history degrees or programs or centres around the world. And so I have been using a map, which has all of these centres, and going into each one and finding contacts for them, checking what whether it's a degree or a program, making sure the information is up to date and putting that all into a database, a table on Excel, so that the International Federation for Public History can essentially broaden their network of connections and use this list to help inform them of what programs and degrees and centres are out there and are available. And so I think this work is relevant to a wide audience because it aids information sharing, which is, you know, one of the key aims of public history. It's to facilitate the sharing of information. So, you know, to be able to invite all of these contacts to the monthly events, and to get in touch with them and share you know, the information that you have and the information that they have. I think that's really great. I mean, I had no idea the sheer number of degrees and programs and research centres that were specifically focused on public history. I was really surprised at the number that I found while doing this work. And it was really exciting to me, actually, that there are so many options out there for people to study public history as an academic discipline, to then be able to take that into their career. And there's so many research centres that want to specifically look at public history. So that was really cool for me. And I think, yeah, it's useful because the more connections that are made between all of these faculties and these research centres and these organisations, the more information can be shared, and, you know, everyone is then more informed. And I think it's great because the more information that is available to public historians, the more that benefits the wider community, because they can take that information and use it to benefit the community. So I think that's really cool. And you get, you know, by doing this networking, you can find out how people in different places do public history, which is another great thing. You mentioned before, Jimena, that in different countries there are different ways of doing public history, and there's different people approach it differently. So it's, you know, it's a great way to share these different approaches. So yeah, and I'm also, this work is not finished yet, but I'm working on a blog post to go up on bridging, which is about the recent rise in the I guess, yeah, public history being consumed by the wider community. I mentioned before that podcasts for me were a huge interest. So I was thinking, when I was thinking about topics to write about, I thought there's been a huge boom in history podcasts, history shows, history channels, history publications, all of these things. And I think that's really reflective of more people acknowledging that public history is important and should be paid attention to. So I'm currently working on that, but that's not yet complete.
Thank you. Yes, I think the work you have done, actually, it's very different, but it's very, very, very valuable. I mean, the Jamsins blog posts that are going to be up soon, I promise, are amazing, are really amazing. And the database, Imogen, it's really awesome. I mean, sometimes interns don't like that job very much, but you have done a tremendous job, and it's super useful. And I think, yeah, it's super cool. So I can't thank you enough for that. So I want to ask you a little something a little bit more concrete, like with the use of examples, if you want. Does the practice of, after telling me all of this, does the practice of public history make sense to you? Can you give me like a particular example where which you can think about? It makes sense to treat some kind of topic through the lens of public history than through armchair history, let's say.
I'll take
Go,
away.
yeah.
Yeah, I think as a practice, it definitely makes sense. I think that armchair history, as you say, or the traditional way of doing history as an academic discipline, it has its limits. It's great for people who are in the academic community, but it doesn't necessarily do much more than that. You can't, because that information isn't necessarily super accessible, unless you go looking for it, but a lot of people don't. So I think public history as a practice totally makes sense, and I think it's fantastic because there are so many ways that it's beneficial. I think one of the things that springs to mind for me as a way of using history to approach a topic is policy. I think people ignore history when making decisions about the future, and I think that is a huge mistake. And it's something that I've always thought, studying history, you look back and you see these patterns in history of people repeating the same mistakes and not recognizing people and communities. And so I think public history is a great tool for bringing the lessons from history to people who might not learn those lessons otherwise. So bringing it into the public sphere so that more people can actually use history to inform their decisions. And I think particularly of social issues and social justice, I think public history can really help with that as well, because it's I guess looking at the past and recognizing what could have been done better or what wasn't done right, and actually then implementing those lessons in the future. I think that's really helpful. And I know that for a lot of public historians, social justice and social change is a really big focus of a lot of their work. So that's, for me, I think it's a great tool and it's a great practice, and it totally makes sense.
Thank you, Imogen. Tamsin?
Yeah, so sort of like along the same lines as what Imogen was saying, I think it is absolutely like a brilliant way of like communicating history. It absolutely makes sense to me as a discipline and as a job, because I think when you look at the historical canon and like how history has always been studied and how it's always been presented, it's very much in universities and it's very much written in a certain way that's quite scholarly, and it looks at certain communities. It doesn't necessarily acknowledge certain people throughout history. So I think moving history away from solely being within an academic sector and making it more accessible to the public, making it consider the public a bit more, I think that's absolutely a really, really valuable thing. Not everyone wants to go to university. Not everyone has access to go to university. Not everyone learns well in a traditional academic environment. Not everyone has the money to do it. Not everyone has the skills to read a historical paper. I know I didn't a couple of years ago. That was something that I had to learn while at university. But not everyone has the ability to do that. So being able to still share this historical knowledge out to the public, I think that's massively valuable. And also in covering like underrepresented perspectives, like looking at how public history has been allowing the LGBT community to be able to be represented a bit more in historical discussions where academic research hasn't necessarily covered it or hasn't necessarily been able to put things out as fast as public history. A research project isn't necessarily going to take the same time frame as a podcast. So it's sort of a bit of a quicker way of looking at certain topics, and it's also a more accessible way of looking at certain topics because there's not, the paywall that university has. And it's just, with the internet, it's so much easier to access if you're not necessarily looking for the academic, scholarly side of it. So I think it's massively valuable.
Yes, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, go.
I was just going to add there as well, that there's a big fight for history to be considered important. and worth people's time. I know that, governments at the moment in Australia and I know in some other countries as well, are putting up the prices for degrees in history and other humanities. And I think if history is contained only within academic institutions, it's really hard to argue to other people why it's important and why it should be studied. And I think that the practice of public history is the way of showing why history is important and why the study of history should still be done, because through public history we're showing how it can benefit more than just some people in a university with their big books. So I think it's good, because it's actually, why should anyone think that history is important if they can't access it and can't learn anything from it? So public history is allowing that to happen, which is great.
Yes, I can't agree more with you. And both of you touched upon a topic that I think is really important. It's about the topic of language. That has to be something really important. Some traditional historians, let's say, think that using certain kind of language gives them like more authority, if you want, or make them more knowledgeable. Fine, but public history is not about that. I think it's more about what you have mentioned, making it accessible to people who have interest but perhaps don't have the resources or access to it. So I think it's a very important, actually almost mandatory tool that history needs to have nowadays. That brings me to the next question. You already mentioned it, but I would like a little bit, if you can tell me more about that. Do you feel or believe that academic history and public history are opposite, or can be done simultaneously? Can you think of an example? Do you know a particular case?
So I don't know any particular cases, but absolutely they should be done simultaneously. Like, no one's saying that we should stop doing academic research. I think, we'd collapse a bit if we stopped doing academic research. But there's nothing to say that the findings of that research shouldn't be made accessible in an academic setting, but also made accessible to the general public. An academic research paper isn't going to do as much for your average person as being able to read those results online, not behind a paywall, in more readable language. Like, absolutely they should be done simultaneously, because there's no losses there. Like, there's a little bit of extra work, but so many more people will be able to get the benefit of that research. I can't see a single negative.
Yeah, I agree. I think they are different. The traditional academic discipline of history aims to do something very different than what public history aims to do, but they absolutely can be done simultaneously. And I think, a great example of this is a historian doing very, very comprehensive research on a topic that they specialize in, and finding something new and adding to the existing academic literature on that topic for other historians in that field. But they might then take their work and go and talk about it on a podcast in a way that is easier to understand and takes less time than, say, reading a dense academic paper. So I think, and it will reach a different community and a broader community. So I think there's ways of doing them alongside each other, or for an academic historian to do their research and then go and act as a consultant for maybe film or TV and bring their knowledge into the public sphere. Yes, I think as well, it's important to say that public history is very much grounded in academic research, and but they can both be done together alongside one another.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. If one of the objectives as historians is to make knowledge available, I think we need to think which are those ways to do it, like in the best, I wouldn't say effective, or efficient, but like friendly again way, in a language that appeals to everybody. So I think that's really important, and that doesn't make it less of a very rigorous treatment, historiographical research using the sources like in a very rigorous way. I think that's still, I think that gap is not being as wide as it was before, but there's still some work to do there. There's still some historians that still have a little bit of reserves with the practice of public history. But I mean, we're getting there. I think public history is becoming more popular every day because it has a lot of advantages. So, do you think you would be using public history tools in your professional future? Do you think you can use them or not? Do you see yourself practicing public history?
Absolutely. I mean, my future career ideally will be working in research and working in museums. So, like, working in a public history sector and maybe doing some of the same academic research, in another setting. But again, I can't see the negatives in presenting that research also in an accessible way to the general public. Like, I really don't see any reason to not do introduce aspects of public history into regular academic research. So yeah, absolutely, I can see myself using public history in the future. I think it's going to be the basis of most of my career, probably.
Great. Imogen?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm currently working as a legal secretary. So my current professional career doesn't offer really many opportunities for me to use any history tools, public or otherwise. But once I have graduated, I hope to move into the history field, in which case I will definitely be using public history tools, because at the moment, further study in like a master's degree isn't part of the plan. It may be one day, but not right now, which means that if I do move into the history field, the sorts of jobs that I would be doing would probably be in museums or libraries, that kind of thing. And that is literally public history right there. So yeah, I would very much hope that I will be using public history tools in my professional future.
Okay, Imogen, I have this question, well, also for Tamsin, but mostly for you. In your environment that you're saying that you work as a legal secretary, like in a very, very particular environment, how would you explain to those people what public history is?
I think it's actually quite useful to, and I have had to do this. I have had to explain to people what it is, because you say at work, well, yeah, I'm still studying and I'm doing this internship, and they say, oh, what's public history? And they usually say history for the public, and I say, well, yeah, kind of. I think it's useful to almost define public history in terms of what it is not, just because it's such a broad term. So I would say to people in my work environment, I'd say, well, it's not history by academics for academics in academic institutions. It's history it's a practice, it's a way of doing history that engages with the community and brings that information out in a more accessible way through things like museum exhibitions, podcasts, film and TV, community organizations, community groups, all of those things, all of the ways that someone who has never studied history might engage with history, that's public history. That's sort of how I suppose, that would be my elevator pitch for public history.
Thank you. Tamsin, and what about you? Have you ever had the chance or the opportunity, for example, to talk to a group that doesn't know what public history is and explain it to them? Or how would you explain it to, for example, a group of teenagers that go to the museum you work in, and if they ask you, what's public history? How would you answer that?
Yeah, so I think I've got a bit of a different background because I do volunteer in a museum when I'm not at university. So I'm already sort of inbuilt in the public history sector anyway. So if someone asked me, like, the first thing I could say is like, look around you at the building we're in. Like, that's the first step, is like, this is history that we're looking at right now, but we're not in a university. You're not reading an academic paper. So I've never had to actually explain it to someone, because I think if anyone who like worked at the museum as well asked me, I think they'd know probably. But yeah, similar to what Imogen was saying, like it's what is not that's more important than what it is, because it's such a broad topic. It's not academic stuff for academics by academics in an academic field. It's history for the public, by academics, but also by other members of the public who've had some interest in history. You don't necessarily have to have a background in, like, a university background in history to work in a museum. I know a couple of people who don't, who work in the same museum that I volunteer in. It's such a broad thing. It's social media accounts that talk about history. It's podcasts, it's YouTube videos, it's documentaries, it's all sorts of things. See, I think, like what Imogen said, the easiest way of defining public history is defining what it's not, because that's one singular thing. But what it is such a broad idea.
Yeah, I think that's a very good answer. Actually, I'm going to also use it when I get the question, that I still get the question a lot. I think that's a good way to answer. And just to bring this interview to an end, can you mention like some advantages of using public history? Which kind of advantage? Let's think about, I don't know, 3 or 4 advantages that you can think of using public history. Who wants to go first? Imogen? Oh.
I will. I think as someone who is interested in having a career in history, but isn't in a position right now to do further study, public history as a field, for me, the obvious advantage is that it brings so many more career opportunities. It brings people ways of having a career in history and something that they're very passionate about, without having to simply teach it in a high school or university setting. So that to me, because I did think for a while, I thought, if I want to have a career in history, those are my 2 options: to teach at high school or to teach at university level. And now I know that is not the case. And I think, so I think that's a really key advantage. I think another advantage is that it encourages and facilitates access to information for people who, as Tamsin said before, don't have the money or the time to pursue the academic study of history. For me, that's probably one of the most important things, because without public history, it would be so closed off to most people. Yes, I think that's a really great advantage. Tamsin?
Yes, I've got some sort of similar ideas as you, but the main one to me is accessibility, like the accessibility of information. Like I said earlier, that idea of the democratization of history that I've had come up in history classes before, the idea that we're making history a lot more publicly accessible. That's such a valuable thing. It's so important. Like, public history can be like someone's first step into becoming interested in history. Like, I can tell you that my first interest in history came from seeing museums, from watching historical TV shows, from watching horrible histories. That's one of the earliest things for me, like, and being able to read books that are set in historical Australia and then go out to the rocks in Sydney, and I can see the places in front of me that were written about in this book that was set back in the 1800s. So like it's such a good stepping stone into getting into the academic field if that's what you want to do. It's this really easy, accessible way to get kids, to get adults, to get anyone interested in history for the first time, or to continue facilitating that interest. It's a great way of, without the massive time and money commitment that an academic sphere has, it's a great way of learning a bit about a lot. There's no real limit to what you can learn about through public history. Maybe you're not going to get the same depth of information just on the surface level. You can certainly go out and find that. But you can still learn about so much, and in such an accessible way. Like that's something that a university environment can't necessarily give to everyone. So yeah, I think the advantage of public history is absolutely accessibility for anyone who's even slightly interested.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say another thing that I think is worth mentioning as well is that history, the history of any country or any group of people has for a very long time been preserved in a very specific way, and with history traditionally being only done by a specific group of academics, it means that everyone's history is in their hands essentially, and it gets recorded in the way that they choose to record it. And I think public history is really great because it allows communities to actually have a say in how their own history is being preserved, and then to engage with that. So I think like we talked about community museums, and we were looking at doing Instagram content on smaller museums that had a specific community focus, and that's a great example because it actually lets the people whose history it is have a say in what should be preserved, in what should be remembered, and how. And I think that's really lovely and really important.
Yeah, I think that's key. I was going to add that. I'm glad you did. I think that's key. One of the things that I like about public history is that shared knowledge and that shared authority, and just it's not giving voice to the people because we don't give voice to anybody. I mean, people can talk by themselves. It's like being a facilitator or mediator for those communities to get out and deliver a message. I think that for me is really interesting, and I think public history does a great job with that. Is there anything else you would like to add to this before we finish? Is there any comment? Do you want to wrap up? Is there any impression, any critique, even if there's something you didn't like about the internship, you can also say that. I mean, is there anything, a final comment that you would like to put out there?
I just want to quickly say that with Imogen's last point of like community histories being able to tell themselves, I hadn't brought that up earlier, but that's something that I absolutely care so much about, and I think it's really important. Like, being part of the LGBT community, like there's not a whole lot of academic history. Like the field is growing, absolutely, but through things like social media accounts, and the internet, and just having this access to public history, it's been something where even in the last 4 years, I've seen a massive increase in the amount of discussion of this history that hadn't previously been discussed. And like that's the kind of history that I want to go on and do a master's in. But that's not to say that I don't think that just because I'm doing it in an academic sphere doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done publicly as well. Because I think, not everyone is getting involved in the academics. So I think it's massively important that communities can represent themselves in an accessible and interesting way. So I think, yeah, that's one of these really, really great advantages of using public history.
Imogen?
I definitely don't have any critiques. This internship has been really enjoyable and really interesting, and I've learned so much. And I said it before, but one of the things that just I was so thrilled to see was the number of opportunities that are out there around the world for people to study public history. It's so exciting that people want to specifically study public history and then go on and do public history in their professional lives. I think that's great. And it's nice that it's a growing field, because there are just so many benefits to it. And yeah, no, it's been a really great experience. That's
I'm really happy to hear that. I enjoy very much working with students, because I mean, students are like the future of the field. And I also agree with Imogen about like the field is growing really fast, and it's getting like a lot of opportunities for young people. For example, with digital humanities, the field is widening up really a lot, and it brings a lot of opportunities, not only of research but of community work and academic work. I mean, it depends. So I think if you would like to pursue that in the future, there are many opportunities, and I mean, and you already have the information. So I would like to thank you very much for pursuing this internship. As I said, I always learn a lot from students about what they like, they don't like, what they think about public history, etc. It has been a pleasure, and I would encourage future students to keep on doing this. And thank you very much, girls. I wish you all the best in your careers and your efforts. I hope you pursue a public history career if you wish. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.